Hello and welcome back once again to the Single Malt Review. Now it's a rather special whisky we're doing this episode, so I thought in producing it I would just tack on this abridged history of the whisky itself, because it does have quite a rich history, richer than most, more happening than most, I guess you could say. This is of course Adelphi's new whisky. This is Ardnamurchan Spirit from their new, brand spanking new distillery. So I'll run through pretty quick the abridged history of the Adelphi Distilling Company and its various distilleries. So, it all started, as I conspicuously look at my notes, because there's no way I'm holding all these dates in my brain, I'm sorry. It's all started back in 1826 when they built the original Adelphi distillery, which was renamed subsequently to the Loch Katrine Adelphi distillery. Loch Katrine was its water source, which is a long way away from Glasgow, but they sort of had it piped in by quite a, sort of a system to bring it in there. Glasgow, not renowned for its local sources of very, very clean water, among other things. But it was built in Glasgow. It was built along the River Clyde, which sort of bisects the city, and in the now famous / infamous, I suppose, Gorbals district, of which it has a very, very close history. And so that was quite a big old distillery back then, 2.3 litres per annum of alcohol, which is not even small by today's standards. That is the size of that's about the size of Lagavulin today, and that is not a small distillery. So pretty big business over there, and it produced grain alongside the malt whisky, which was not as strange a thing as it is today. There's very, very few distilleries which still do that. The only one I can say off the top of my head would be Loch Lomond Distillery. But at any rate, that went along producing its whisky. Of course, none remains now. That would be a hell of a thing to see, and a hell of a thing to see the auction for as well. But no, not a shred of original Adelphi whisky remains, to my knowledge, which is a shame, because I'm sure that would be quite fascinating to see. But that all sort of came to a very famous end in 1906 when it was all part of the Great Gorbals disaster. It's hyperbolically known as the Great Whisky Flood, but it wasn't a whisky flood because they had a washback go, or the supports on a washback go, which toppled over, dominoed a few other washbacks, and let go a whole lot of semi-fermented wash into the streets, and I think killed one person. So that's the scale of the amount of liquid that was released. And normally referred to as the Great Whisky Flood, but it of course wasn't whisky. I've even seen people say it was raw alcohol, and that was, no, absolutely not. Thin beer is probably what it was. And still, no less damaging to have hurtled down the street at you, I'm sure. But anyway, that pretty much spelt the end of the original Adelphi distillery, and it was, sorry, something in my eyeball there, and it was demolished finally at the end of the 60s. For some reason, no one thought to take a picture, or at least no one that ever uploaded one. I could find no images. I was going to have some nice sort of professional slides for you here, rather than just my mug in the middle of the screen while I went over this history, but no, I could find nothing on the original distillery, even as it sort of stood closed in the 60s, early 70s, but no, not a single shred of evidence there. Similarly, not so much as an artist's rendition of the Great Gorbals disaster, so coming up a little short there, my apologies. Anyway, we move forward to the 90s, 1993, if my facts are correct, when the great-grandson of one of the distillery's founders, Jamie Walker, one of those Walkers, founded the Adelphi bottling company. And they went on to become, and they remain, one of the most popular and the most sort of happening, the most now bottling companies out there, independent bottlers, of course. And if anyone doesn't know what they do, then you can probably have a wee look through some of our videos, because we try to cover as much independently bottled whisky as we can, because it's some of the most interesting, and you think slightly paradoxically, some of the most inexpensive whisky. Maybe not all Adelphi bottles could come into that inexpensive category, but a few can now and then. But yes, they sort of rolled on and became bigger and bigger, more and more popular, and at some point they decided to bring it all back around and build their own distillery. And why not, I suppose? Building new distilleries has gotten sort of increasingly fashionable as the 2000s have rolled on. There's quite a number of them coming up now, but Adelphi's was quite a small project, and it got it done pretty jolly promptly. It didn't have too much of a long construction cycle there, and in 2014 they opened it with His Royal Highness the Prince of Monaco, I believe, attending the ceremony. Someone who can probably reliably afford their whiskey, so good on him. And they've sort of started distilling since then. They do a peated spirit as well as an unpeated. This, I think, is an unpeated variant because it doesn't strike me as particularly peaty. And they've brought it together from, I think, 44 was the number, 44 octave casks. Octaves are very, very small by whiskey standards. They're 55 litres. And these ones, these ones were sort of up in the rafters in the ultra maturation zone to bring us this spirit, because it's not whiskey, because it's just a hair over 2 years old, so not legally whiskey, but as you'll find in the tasting video, not too shabby either. So, with that out of the way, we'll get into the good stuff, the meat of the matter, why you are probably tuning in the first place. If you even watched this, I'm sure I gave people the opportunity to skip right to the tasting, so I may be talking to myself here, but at any rate, through the magic of cinema, I will summon up Dave and shorten my hair by about, let's say, a month, because this is when that's when we recorded the actual tasting. I've been a bit slow producing this month, but anyway, here we go. Tasting. Right, and now what you've all been waiting for, probably, the tasting, the real meat of the exercise here. What are we looking at here, Dave?
Well, this is the second edition of Ardnamurchan's Spirit, their single malt spirit. It's going to be whiskey eventually. It's not quite there yet due to the whole 3-year rule. It must be at least 3. So, we've just passed the 2-year mark. I believe you covered the exact age of a spirit earlier in the video.
More or less.
What we have, though, is a very strong, very young cask strength whiskey, 53.6% ABV, exclusively matured in first fill sherry, mixture of Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez. And they're all octave casks, is that right?
They are all octaves.
25 litre, 1/8 casks.
They're all octaves, and they're all sherry, be it Oloroso or PX. So this is a 100% sherry matured whiskey, and it is a
not
whiskey
a
of...
whiskey. We don't use the W word.
Well, it's a whiskey, it's not a Scotch whiskey.
No.
You can call it whiskey.
Let's just call it spirit. Now we get confusing. If it's from Scotland, it's a single malt.
We'll call it...
Just a single malt spirit from Scotland, from the Highlands, no less.
So it's a very fraught thing. But this is a whiskey of...
Or not
almost... Oh, Jesus. It's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. It's a spirit of almost infinite quirks. It is something that they have produced. It's the second thing that they have produced. In fact, I did not try the first limited release. If anybody did, please tell us in the comments what you thought of it, because that was even younger, and I'd be fascinated to know how it turned out, because this one is quite... This is remarkable on a great many levels. As you said, it's pretty strong, 53.6%. which is pretty strong and pretty indicative for a single cask whiskey. But think about it this way. This is, and I almost said it again, but caught it that time, this spirit is just over 2 years old, and it was filled at just over 63%. So it has lost pretty much 10% of its volume in 2 and a bit years. That will give you an idea of just how rapidly they have managed to make this sort of prototype whiskey mature.
Using small casks in a very ventilated warehouse, going for maximum aging and minimum time.
They have almost achieved like Cavalan levels of evaporation, and thus what they're hoping for.
Insofar as you can.
Maturation.
Much more temperate.
They have shoved these little octave casks up in the roof, and they've been sort of wafting them up there with tea towels, doing their very best to make this mature at lightning speed, and it kind of has. Look at the colour. Yeah, look at the colour on that. It's shocking.
We've tried 15, 16-year-old whiskies recently, which were this colour.
Yeah, I mean, they are first fill, so they've got everything going for them, but still, that is shockingly deep colour for a whiskey so young. And it's, let's work that out. That's about just over a 5% rate of evaporation per year. That's normally kept around or a little bit under 2% for your average Scotch
They
whiskey.
definitely want maximum whiskey in minimum time.
So yeah, they have burnt this one hot.
Yeah.
This is not by any means their production type of whiskey. This is just something to provide this sneak preview that we've been able to get our hands on. This is probably not too indicative of what the eventual Adelphi whiskey will be like, because that will be maturing a bit more typically.
And while I did miss the first Ardnamurchan release, as did Tim as well, I've been hugely excited to see what Adelphi were going to do once they announced they're going into the distilling game for themselves, because they've always found and bottled the most quirky, unique, astonishing, single cask offerings. They're some of the best whiskey I've ever had. The most unique and memorable has come from Adelphi. So when they actually get their hands on what they're doing for themselves, I've been looking forward to this for so long.
The watching and being a part of the coming of age of the Adelphi's distillery, the Ardnamurchan distillery, that is going to be that's probably the most stunning, dynamic, interesting thing that's going to be happening in the world of whiskey for some time. So that's going to be a hell of a thing to watch.
Yeah.
And we will be right
there.
there.
Are already some heady fumes filling up our recording space here, so I'm keen to get stuck in.
It's pretty heady whiskey.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very spiritus, lots of raw alcohol flavour there.
Yeah,
aroma, rather.
They've done a lot with it, but you cannot hide the fact that it's under 3 years old.
Still, though, lots of pepper, lots of ginger, marmalade, some ripe, juicy orange. It is bursting with a lot of flavour. There's big influence of the both sets of casks, Oloroso and the PX. Both bring different things to the table.
Though it's quite detectably young, though it doesn't really attempt to mask its age, it has very, very little burn on the nose.
It's not as brutally incendiary as you'd normally expect for something that's well over 53%.
Quite gentle for a 53% of there, and a lot of flavours coming through. There is a lot of quite dry, spicy flavours, in addition to no small amount of peat. I'm not sure what their peating source is, unless, and this is going to let on which way around we've done this video, unless I've already discovered that in the little doco that I've already run on this one. We may be fully aware of that, but right in this point of amorphous time, pre-production, I do not know the source of their peat, but given the smell of it, I think it's...
ruin the illusion of cinema, we are filming this before Tim has recorded the introductory blurb you've already heard.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, it's all a bit like... it's all getting a bit interstellar, really, but anyway, we won't think too hard about it. It strikes me very much of mainland peat, so think more Ardmore than Islay. Very much more Ardmore than Islay. Dry, sort of smouldering, coaly. In this case, very much...
Coal is good, I'm getting that, certainly.
Coal and a bit of sort of dry driftwoody kind of aromas. It specifically mentions driftwood, actually, I think, there. But there's huge amounts of spice on this as well.
I've got to give them good props for this packaging and presentation. The largely smoked bottles, so you can't really see what you're looking at. Just a thin window to behold the... it means there's no chance of mistaking this for a standard whiskey bottling, so no one's going to feel ripped.
It's a funny wee bottle.
Then there's the description down the front. They point out details about the farm, the casks, the production methods, and then finally at the bottom they describe themselves as unpronounceable. Who would disagree? I think we've got Ardnamurchan down quite nicely, but at the same time, a bit of self-deprecating humour goes a long way. I
would like to hear an American choke it out. I think that would be more challenging the further away you got from any accent born out of the United Kingdom.
It does help that our local whiskey supplier is himself a Scotsman.
Anyway, that's the nose. Spicy, dry, significantly peaty. Albeit young, it's not harsh.
No.
It's young but gentle.
It is raw and rough, but not savagely so.
So, the palate.
Oh, wow, that is exceedingly hot. It is basically on fire. It is lashings of white spirit, but a very strong backbone of all those cask flavours. I'm going to take another sip so I can get even more out of it.
There's a fair bit going on. It is, as you might expect, it's pretty woody, given how much wood's gone in. There's, again, you can't hide the young spirit, it's in there, but that's all right.
There's such an explosive richness from the casks too. It is bursting with a sappy, woody stickiness and some, the cakes, confections, and fruits you'd normally expect from those various sherry casks.
The sappiness is a good one there. There's quite fresh wood, a little bit of sort of sawdust in there, lots of different types of cask influence. The peat is a little tangier than it was on the nose.
It's more noticeable. I'm getting it more. I did not pick it up at first on the nose. I'm definitely getting it through on the tongue now.
And really still quite spicy.
Yes, this is so vibrant, so explosively powerful. It's almost evaporating off the tongue. You try to hold it in your mouth to give a nuance, and it's wafting away into your palate, into the roof of your mouth.
It moves. It's quite a fast moving palate. It goes places, and it does that really, really quite quickly. Boy,
wow, that is just again readily drinkable at a very high strength.
Yeah, if I'd encountered this as a 12-year-old whiskey, I'd say that it was pretty well on par and had quite a lot of flavour going on.
Yeah.
Really, the most amazing thing about this whiskey is the fact that it's, and I know I've said it again, I've broken it, never mind, come at me litigators. It is 2 and a bit years old. It is so young, and yet has come so far in that short space of time. I think if we were in a pre-Cavalan world, a pre... why does the name escape me? Indian distiller.
John Paul or Amrit.
John Paul and Amrit. Amrit was what I was thinking of, though John Paul should get their props too. Still looking for one of theirs to review sooner or later. In a world pre those whiskies that really showed what a rapid maturation, hot maturation could achieve, this would have... I'd lost my mind trying this spirit. Absolutely just lost my mind, ran out of the house, taken all my clothes off. I couldn't have comprehended.
Yeah.
Now that I think I'm now spoiled because I've tasted those whiskies, and I know that sort of magic can happen if you apply the right elemental forces to your casks. Because I've seen, particularly Campbell, I've seen them do witchcraft with 6-year-old whiskey or younger and produce something amazing. But this is the first time I've seen it even remotely happen in Scotland. And it really, really is happening. If you fast forward this whiskey, if you imagine this as 10-year-old, if there was any whiskey left, you'd have to sort of sweep up the paste left in the bottom of the barrel. It would have evaporated so much. But if you sort of move this forward till it was a 10-year-old whiskey, the amount of flavour and concentration on this would be indescribable.
You basically spread it. You eat it with a spoon.
Yeah, I can't even comprehend in my mind how rich and concentrated it would be if this is what 2 and a bit years represents. Of course, that doesn't mean that all Adelphi's Ardnamurchan whiskey is going to be like that when it's 10 years old. I will bet you, a full $2 that it's going to be outstanding because Adelphi doesn't mess around in anything that they do. But it's not going to be like this. It's not all built like this. It's going to be more typically aged in sensible sized casks at sensible temperatures. So it'll be a slower moving thing. But if this was taken to 10 years old, it would just be bananas, absolutely bananas. But we'll judge it as it is without letting our imagination run too much amok. Although it's pretty easy to do with stuff like this, and judge this one on its own merits, which I think are strong as they are.
Now, drinking this spirit at this strength, normally it would have been too much. My palate would not have coped. So either there's something particularly drinkable about this one, or else it's just the fact that our palates have been hardened by all the weapons grade 50-60% bourbons we've tried over the last couple of years.
I think this is genuinely quite gentle. The burn, it kind of keeps the burn on its way down. Then you kind of, it catches up with you, but not too much on the tongue.
Yeah.
Now I've heard this is better at cask strength from pretty reputable sources, but wouldn't be doing my due diligence unless I had a wee look myself.
I'd say a good comparison, in terms of just that sheer syrupy, resiny strength that it's got, a good equivalent, the closest I've had to that, is your whiskey, the spirit you've made, which pops in those adorable 5-litre custom-built casks that you use. I've had some of that which you gave as a wedding gift, We've tried it at 1 year old, 2 years old, and 3 years old, and it's got a similar, violently punchy, syrupy, intensely strong alcohol, but also layers upon layers of rich flavour underneath.
I suppose it shares a few similarities there because that was also that was European oak I used for that one, not X anything to its detriment. I think it started off with fresh oak, which I had in that case seasoned with some spirit and then just tipped out because I'll tell you what, if you use a fresh French oak barrel of any size, I suspect, which has not had something to take the edge off, what you get is oak tea, and it is not usable. But yeah, once I gave it a bit of a treatment, there is a few similarities here. I wouldn't want to say that mine was nearly as good as this, but it was, as you say, it does have a few parallels in terms of how it was made.
That sappy potency too. Okay, that's a bit more mild. That has really softened the nose. Extremely. It's just like a gentle fruit smorgasbord now. Oh, and that's a fruit nectar on the tongue now too. That is so sweet and light. It probably isn't. It just tastes that way compared to how strong it was before, but bringing that alcohol level down, diluting it slightly, it's a bit of clouding there, but not a whole lot. And it's now gone very sweet and smooth.
Yeah, it's gone hugely sweet.
It is well nectary.
That has really, really supercharged the sherry wood there for whatever reason. That's really, really brought it to the front, and it's hugely, hugely sweet. Which
just
is
a
normally
little sprinkling of sea salt on the end to hint at that peatiness.
Yeah, normally that sherry character would diminish slightly with the addition of water, but this just seems to really make it explode. And yeah, that maritime saltiness, because I mean, this whiskey is on the coast. You stand on the grounds of the distillery, look out to sea practically, and that's really coming through. Rock salt, as it says on the back of the label there, which I would agree with. There is a distinct maritime saltiness there.
Yeah. Now this is actually matured in the Ardnamurchan castle. Is that right? That's where they're based? No?
They're based in the Glenborrow Castle, which is some distance inland, I think. This will be aged, I think, more or less proximate to the distillery itself. Distilled and aged on the coast, as far as I'm aware. But
New Adelphi had themselves their own castle.
They do. Headquarters in Glenborrow, which I'm sure is a charming place. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd mind that with water at all. It is quite different, but I don't think it's diminished it. Diminished it in the slightest. So, scores for this, which will be a bit weird for a number of reasons. One, this isn't technically a whiskey, so I guess you'd stand it aside from that. But I think it's I wouldn't mind if you compare this score with other single malts because it's punching in that weight category by all means. This one, to me, the only detractor for this is that I'm quite sensitive to and quite picky with immature spirit, which this whole thing top to bottom is immature spirit. It's really, really young, and that does show through. It's that slightly almost there's that metallic, slightly coppery taste of very, very young spirit, and that's still here, although taking the back seat to all those other wonderful flavours, and that's where it loses points for me. That's where it stops it from being an impossibly perfect thing at 2 and a bit years old. So for me, this whiskey gets a... Oh, I said it for the last and final time. Whatever. This spirit gets an 88. It's still really, really, really fabulous. Yeah. What do you think?
I'm similarly impressed. The extent to which this has gained flavour, a character, and sheer drinkability after such a short time means that this stands out as an easy 89 for me. It is strong, it is aggressively flavourful, it has done so much in such a short time. And the whiskey it's going to turn into, once it hits 3 years old plus, is going to be quite mind-blowing. As it is a remarkable experience and accomplishment just on its own. At barely 2 and a bit years.
No, it is something we will watch with great interest. And if they do a third release, I'll try to be more faster to get in on that one and get it reviewed, because this is really, really something to watch. This is a phenomena, I think, in the whiskey world.
I've been planning a third release because, after all, this is just over 2 years old. If we wait another year, it's whiskey. They don't need to release it as a spirit anymore.
It will be whiskey next time the third release comes out. It won't be spirit drink anymore, which I think is a really lame term, but anyway. but I don't think we're not going to see normal sort of production level Ardnamurchan whiskey until probably more like 10 years old, when the majority of the stock begins to catch up in its sort of slower time that it's maturing. But if I know Adelphi, I think they've probably got at least one more of these releases to go for when they've got something that is legally whiskey, and I can almost guarantee that it will be amazing and way more expensive than this one, because spirit drink, you can say a lot about the lame name, but whiskey it is not, and it doesn't sell for a great deal compared.
Also, just the rate this is evaporating, they'll be having to basically ring those casks to get the last drops of actual whiskey out.
I think we'll see a version 3 of this, and I'll do my damnedest to get my hands on it. But at any rate, this was version 2 of Ardnamurchan Spirit. I've found it, quite transformative as a whiskey in terms of what can be achieved in Scotland. I think it's something that we will not see again for quite some time, this kind of experiment being run, or we never know. The world of whiskey changes. Maybe the world of whiskey changes so fast these days. Everything is so hot and so valuable that we may see anything. But at any rate, this has been the Adelphi second release of their Ardnamurchan Spirit. It has certainly opened our eyes to a really, really fascinating thing in Scotch whisky. I hope it was informative for you. I think we were a bit long, but you can forgive us this one time, because this, you'll agree, is a whisky with a lot to talk about. So I think for anyone wanting this, it should still be on sale. I mean, we can still get it here. So if
buy
nothing
soon
else,
and buy often.
If you really can't find it, you could always give Whiskey Galore down here, our locals, a bell. They do ship internationally. I think it's one per, so you won't be able to stock up. But there should still be some floating around the rest of the world as well. You shouldn't have to go to those lengths. Shipping it from New Zealand, goodness, that Scotch would have gone on a long trip if it had to come all the way down here, only to go back to the Northern Hemisphere. But at any rate, should be available if you're interested, and by God, you should be interested, because it is a hell of a thing. At any rate, this has been the Single Malt Review. Thank you for tuning in to this extra long episode of Ardnamurchan. We'll be right back with something, alas, a bit more normal, but nonetheless, hopefully stunning on all its own.
Slàinte.
Cheers. Slàinte. Catch us next time.